Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Elaine Dennehy. I'm a vet with Munster Bovine, and I'm joined tonight by Rosarii O'Connor, who is the Milk Recording Field Manager for Munster Bovine. So tonight we'll be talking all things milk recording. We will be speaking about the benefits of milk recording and how you can use your milk recording results to make decisions on your farm. Rosarii will be explaining how the constituent results are calculated for the milk recording, and also what herd owners can do from a practical point of view to ensure they get the best quality results that they can from their milk recording. There's also a really nice milk recording section in FarmOps, which is Munster Bovine's farm management app. So we'll have a look at that also. If you do have any questions for us, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen and we'll get to those at the end. So I suppose we'll start with the benefits of milk recording. So this slide is titled The Hidden Benefits of Milk Recording. And I suppose that's because you do your milk recording, you get your results. There's a lot of information in those reports. And I know from speaking to herd owners at the herd health meetings at the end of the year that the reports, people can find them overwhelming to look at, and they can find it difficult to extract the information that they're looking for from those reports. So we'll go through those reports later on in the webinar. The first, I suppose, most obvious benefit of milk recording is for somatic cell count management. So be that identifying those high SCC cows at your milk recording and maybe, giving those some extra attention. Do they need treatment? Or, maybe managing your bulk tank SCC at the time. But also, it's really important to look at SCC trends over time. So if you have a high cow, is she a repeat offender? Is she consistently high in the cell count? Is she maybe chronically infected with a very poor chance of cure? And you really want to identify those cows that maybe you can dry a quarter or maybe earmark them for culling. Also, I suppose the time of year that it is now, it's very important that we can use your milk recording results to assess how your dry period has worked. So have cows picked up infections over the dry period? And in order to assess that, it's very important to get an early milk recording done. So ideally within 60 days of calving, really. So for a cow to be included in those statistics for the dry period, she has to have her first milk recording within 60 days of calving. So then also, I suppose, breeding and culling decisions is another really big benefit of milk recording. And I suppose if you're serious about herd improvement and genetic gain, you can't beat your milk recording results to make those decisions. So in your milk recording reports, you will have your top 20% of animals, you'll have your bottom 20% of animals, so you can really target those animals that you want to breed replacements off of. Or equally, if all you did was remove your bottom 20% and just breed those to beef, you'd be doing a really good job. So then sale value, look, if you have good milk recording results to back up a cow, obviously it will increase your sale value. Equally for TB compensation, look, in some areas of the country now, TB is a big issue. And again, if you want to get adequate compensation for your cow, good milk recording results are very beneficial. So then nutritional analysis. So I suppose for our herd health meetings at the end of the year, there are our customers that are on the Gold Herd Health Programme. They come in and they meet a Munster Bovine affiliated vet at the end of the year. And the milk recording reports form a large part of that herd health meeting. And one of the things we look at is the nutritional analysis of the milk recording. So what we do with that is we look at the constituents for the milk recording. So we look at the percentage of cows that have a protein of less than 3%. We also look at the fat to protein ratio. And those two things can really indicate maybe an issue with negative energy balance at that point when the milk recording was done. So that's very useful information to have. Also, we look at what a heifer's production is in relation to the mature cows. So a heifer, look, she's never going to produce as much as a heifer as she will as a mature cow. But what you're looking to see is that, she is producing what you would expect her to produce. And if she isn't hitting that target, again, look, there may be some issues with feed or grass allocation or feed space. So then sample value. So what I mean by that is that for a milk recording, there's an individual sample taken from each cow. And there's more that we can do with that sample than just milk recording. So at the moment, it can be tested for pregnancy. So the PAG test, which is a very, very accurate test for pregnancy. And they can also be tested for iones. But we would expect that to expand in the future so that more tests may be done through those milk samples. So then reduced antibiotic usage, which is very topical at the minute. So overuse of antibiotics leads to antimicrobial resistance. So if you're doing regular milk recording and you're doing selective dry cow therapy, you can really pick out those cows that, don't need an antibiotic and reduce your usage of antibiotic there. But equally, if you have those chronic cows that have a very poor chance of cure, you're not pumping those cows full of antibiotics and maybe, contributing to the development of antimicrobial resistance. And then also EBI reliability. So the next slide now shows a graph for the EBI reliability for milk yield. It's actually a slide from Dunnaberry in Teagasc. And what it's showing is the EBI reliability for both genotyped and non-genotyped animals. So the black line is showing non-genotyped animals. So when a heifer calf is born and she's not genotyped, her EBI reliability starts off at 30% for milk yield. And if she's never milk recorded, that's where it'll stay. It'll stay at 30%. But after a number of years, so after 4 years of milk recording results, that EBI reliability for milk yield for that non-genotyped animal actually rises to 75%. So then the red line is showing genotyped animals. So again, when a heifer is born and she is genotyped, her EBI reliability for milk yield is at 70%. And again, look, after a number of years, so 3 to 4 years in this case of milk recording results, that EBI reliability for a genotyped animal rises to about 90%. So a significant rise even for the genotyped animals. And what's also important to mention here is that the animals that were included in this graph were of known parentage, and those parents had milk recording results to back up this EBI reliability. And I suppose the reason I'm pointing that out is that if milk recording stopped in this country in the morning and nobody milk recorded, the EBI reliability, our EBI reliability for milk yield would fall, even for genotyped animals. It mightn't happen today or tomorrow, but give it a few years and the EBI reliability, like I say, even for genotyped animals, would fall significantly. So look, I suppose that's it for the benefits of milk recording. So I'll hand you over now to Rosarii. She's going to go through some of the practical aspects.
Thanks, Elaine. So basically, 57% of herds that are milk recording are doing manual milk recording, and 43% of herds that are doing milk recording are doing EDIY milk recording. And we also have herds with robots that are milk recording. Now, there's been a lot of queries from farmers on how we actually manage to milk record with robot herds. So we're just going to play a short video which demonstrates this.
We have received a number of queries from farmers asking how we carry out milk recording in robotic herds that do not have their own shuttle system. In this video, we will demonstrate the process of milk recording in robotic herds where a dedicated shuttle is not available and explain the steps involved to ensure accurate and reliable milk recording. The three main types of robotic milking systems that we provide a milk recording service for are Lele, Fullwood, and Delaval Robot. We connect the Ore collector to the vacuum in the robot. This vacuum powers the collector, allowing it to rotate the sample bottles during milking. We also connect the Oreo collector to the milk outlet so that the milk sample can be dispensed into the bottles. Next, we put the sample bottles into the Oreo collector and turn on the collector. The milk is collected in jars or meters depending on the type of robot. There is also a live demonstration on the robot screen during the process. Each robot brand has different graphics to display this information. The milk sample enters the holding container and is then drained into the bottle. The collector then rotates to the next bottle using the vacuum. 24 hours later, the technician returns to the farm. She then disconnects the vacuum and milk lines between the Oreo collector and the robot. She then removes the empty bottles and puts caps on the bottles that contain milk. She then numbers the bottles in the order they were filled in the collector. This is a crucial step as it ensures each milk sample is correctly matched to the corresponding cow number. She then writes the label for the tray and shakes the tray to ensure the preservative is activated in the samples. Finally, she places the label on the tray. For inquiries about robot milk recording or any other type of milk recording, please visit our website or call the number displayed on the screen. Thank you.
Well, I hope you found that video interesting. Just to say that if you have any questions on what I'll be covering now, you can put your questions into the chat. So basically what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how the magic behind milk recording, how we do the calculations. So really the backbone of milk recording is the lactation curve. So when I started milk recording, you had to milk record once a month because we didn't have lactation curves. But with lactation curves, with 4 milk recordings in the year, we can accurately calculate what a cow produces in a lactation. And a standard lactation curve takes parity, which is lactation number, month of calving, and the herd level yield into account. There are 2,156 different curves in total. So the next slide will show us how the lactation curves changes throughout the lactation. So if you look at this cow, she was milk recorded. Her first test was done at about 25 days. So she was put on the yellow lactation curve. When she was milk recorded then at around 100 days, she was overestimated on the first recording, so she was put on a lower lactation curve. But you'll notice that the shape of the curve stays the same. So what changes is the height of the curve, but the shape of the curve stays the same. So after the third test then, she was put on a black lactation curve, which is kind of in between the two. So you can see that the height of the curve changes throughout the lactation, and that's how individual tests influence the total yield for the lactation. This is really very, very accurate, and you will get a very accurate summary of what your cows are producing in the lactation using lactation curves. But it's very important that we get cows at all points in the curve. So you need an early milk recording, you need a late milk recording, and then you need points in the middle. So it's very important, if you're only doing 4 milk recordings in the year, that those 4 milk recordings are representative of what the cow does normally. The more tests that you do in the year, the less each individual test influence will have on the lactation curve. But if you're only doing 4, you have to make sure that those 4 tests are representative of what happens on the farm. So the next slide, the next thing we're going to look at now is how, this is another query we get from farmers, is how do we calculate a 24-hour fat and protein when we're only taking 1 sample? So we do this by using a correction factor. And the correction factor uses what we know about milk. So there is a correlation between the yield of the cow and the fat. So the higher the yield, the lower the fat, and the lower the yield, the higher the fat. We do quite a significant correction factor for fat, a really significant correction factor for fat. We do not do such a significant correction factor for protein, because the protein in the morning and the evening, providing the diet, and this is the providing the diet is the same, there isn't a huge difference between AM and PM protein, but there is quite a significant difference in fat. So we do a significant correction factor for fat. So how it works, for example, if you were to take your sample in the morning, what we do then is we calculate what the evening fat would have been. And how we do that is we have the yield and we have the interval. So we use yield and interval to calculate the evening fat. Then we get the kgs of fat for the AM and PM, and we divide it by the total yield. And that gives us a daily percentage fat and a daily percentage protein, which is very accurate. So that's how we calculate those figures. Now, okay, so when we have, and that's when everything is right, but probabilities are when the fat and the protein results are either so high or so low that there is a very low probability that there are true results. So how this is displayed, then we display this on the report. So the cow is in bold and there's an asterisk beside her. So you know then that that cow has a probability. And when with the probabilities, we do not take the results into account for averages. So they're not taken into account for the lactation to date, and they're not taken into account for the lifetime. So if you look at that cow 1912, she had 251 fat and 411 protein. Now that fat to protein ratio is all wrong. So what would happen is that cow would not, that figure would not be used in the lactation curve. But as you've seen earlier from the lactation curves, if we put that 251, 2.51% fat into the lactation curve, it would bring her down. It would actually put her onto a lower curve for the entire lactation. So basically what I'm saying is no information is better than wrong information. And that's what we're covering with the probabilities. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get accurate milk recording, okay? We're trying to get an accurate milk recording. And that depends on getting a representative sample. So the sample must reflect true milk composition, okay? So it's very, very important that we get a representative sample. And we come back to fat. Really, this is the difficult one when it comes to getting a representative sample, because fat variation during milking. So you have lower fat at the start of milking, and then you have higher fat at the end of milking, okay? So you have a difference in fat between morning and evening, as we've explained already, but you also have a difference in fat between the start of milking and the end of milking. And then just to make the whole thing even more complicated, you have the nature of fat. So fat separates out, fat rises to the top. So if you have a jar, the fat will rise to the top. If you have a meter, the fat will rise to the top. So this is where agitation is absolutely critical. So basically, you have the fat rising to the top and you have the sample coming out the bottom. So we must agitate the sample so that we get a representative sample coming out the bottom. This is very, very important. Now, in herds with electronic meters, what's important in that case is that you get a drip sample and that drip sample is continuous throughout the milking. So really, it's really, really important to get a representative sample, particularly for fat. Protein at the start of milking is the same as at the end of milking. It's much, much easier to get a representative sample of protein, much more difficult to get a representative sample of fat. So basically, we need to get a representative sample, okay, as we've seen in the previous slide, but also what we need to do is it must reflect normal farm conditions. As you saw with the lactation curves, we have 4 points in the lactation, and those 4 points must reflect what's happening on the farm. So The milking routine, the milking times is very important. It's very important that the day of the milk recording, you milk your cows at the same time as you do every other day, because we're getting a snapshot, and that snapshot must be accurate of every other day. The other thing that's very important as well is feeding routine. Now, all sampling, getting a representative sample is a real issue for fat. But protein, there's only two things that affect protein. One of them is feeding. So cows, you'll know it yourself, if you put cows into a fresh field of grass, the protein will go up in the tank straight away. It's very, very reactive to diet. So you must make sure that the feeding routine is the same as the normal feeding routine. Cow identification, it begins and ends with cow identification when it comes to milk recording. There's no correction factor, there's no lactation curve, there's nothing we do if we don't have the right sample for the right cow. And this time of the year, you go into parlours and you'll see that the hair is after growing over the winter, the freeze bands need to be clipped, they need to be clean. So cow identification is absolutely critical, and there's nothing we can do. If we don't get the cow identification right in the pit, there's nothing we can do about that afterwards. So it's very important to clip the cows and make sure that the freeze bands can be right. At the moment, we're having problems with contaminated samples because cows are indoors and they're not clean. So when you think about it, the milk goes from the udder straight into the meter. There's no filter. So we're getting grit and we're getting dirt and we're getting all that. And then when the sample goes into the lab to be tested, it has to go through two pipettes, and they're very narrow. So anything that blocks the pipettes means we will not be able to give a result. So it's very important to make sure that the others are clean, and we are having problems with that at the moment. And I suppose when you think of all the benefits that Elaine outlined for milk recording, and when you consider how important it is that we get that milk recording right, just allow extra time for milk recording. It's typically the sampling will add between 20 minutes, maximum half an hour, and the non-sampling really doesn't add that much. And it's 4 times in the year. So just be prepared for that and allow the extra time. And it is well worth it, because the information you get out of milk recording is well worth that extra half an hour. And the things to look at, I suppose, in the parlour. So absolutely critical is the meters are hanging straight. Okay? So we have an awful lot of swing over arms, and the new swing over arms, there's usually a big slant in the swing over arms. So you need to figure out how you're going to get the meters to hang straight. Now, the meters, there's a 5% tolerance built into the meter. So the meter can be out by 5%. But if it's out by more than 5%, it will affect yield. And when it affects yield, it will also affect constituents. So if the meters are tilted too much one way, they will underread. If they're tilted too much the other way, they will overread. So it's very, very important that the meters are hanging straight. And the other thing that's very important is the meters are serviced annually. Now, the DIY meters are serviced every year. Farmer manual meters need to be serviced, but electronic meters also need to be serviced. So a lot of people get the parlour serviced and they don't get the meter serviced. Electronic meters need to be serviced annually. It's very important, that meters are serviced in order that we can get a proper representative sample. Now, like I said to you, there's only two things that affect protein, and one of them is feed and the other is water. So any drop of water at all into a sample will affect protein. And you'll always see it. If you're under in protein and under in lactose, it's added water. Because protein and lactose, which is the sugar in the milk, are very soluble in water. Fat is not. You have to drown a sample for it to be affected by water. But a small drop of water will affect protein. Now, turning off the cluster flush if you don't have a non-return valve. Okay, so people that have jars and that have cluster flush, there's a non-return valve, so the water doesn't go into the jars. Most places, though, they're not set up with a non-return valve for meters. So you need to turn off the cluster flush. And the other thing is, sometimes you actually have to turn off the water at the source, not just the cluster flush. And the other thing to watch with water is electronic meters. If you're rinsing out the meters at the start, or the bottles at the start of milking, make sure that they're drained, because sometimes what you'll find is that the first row of cows will get added water in the first row of cows. So anything that brings water into the system will affect protein. Vacuum is very important in milk recording because we need vacuum for agitation. Now, when you put meters onto a parlour, it adds 2 kPAs. So you need a vacuum reserve to start with. If you have a problem with vacuum, you'll know it in 2 ways. First of all, you might see that the clusters, when you put on the meters, the clusters start falling off. The other thing that you will see is that if you look at the meters washing at the front of the parlour, and if you go back towards the back of the parlour and the meters are washing vigorously at the front of the parlour and they're not washing vigorously at the back of the parlour, then you don't have enough vacuum. So we need a vacuum reserve, and we need vacuum for agitation. And anything that causes loss of air is a problem for us. That means if you don't have the correct liners, if your piping isn't in good condition, if there's cracks, anything that brings air into the system will affect the results. And finally then, this affects jars. And invariably, this time of the year, we get sour samples. And if you get sour samples in the first row of cows and going into the second row of cows, depending on how bad the jars are, you know it's equipment. Now, a lot of people with jars, when they're taking off milk during the spring, they don't let the milk down through the tap. They take off the end of the jar and they put it in, the milk into the bucket. So you need, before a milk recording, you need to make sure that the taps are clean. Now, cleaning taps or cleaning bottles and electronic milk meters comes with its own risks. You make sure that if you're using detergent, that the detergent is properly rinsed out, because the other thing that will give you sour samples is detergent. So make sure that there's no detergent. If you do use detergent, make sure that it's properly rinsed. But invariably, especially in the first milk recording, because the taps haven't been used in a long time, we get sour samples in jars in the spring. So these are the things that we'll say, if you do this in advance of the milk recording, it will all lead to better results. And if anyone has any queries on any of the things that I brought up, you can just put them into the chat. Thanks.
So I'm just going to go through the reports now. So this is your milk recording lifetime summary report. So this is the report you get out after you do your milk recording, and this is the first page of it. So there on the left-hand side, you have the production summary. So that is the average for your herd from that milk recording compared to the top 20% of herds that were milk recorded in the last 2 weeks. So that's your production summary. Then your milk recorded margin per day. So I suppose the beauty of this report is that it's giving you a margin per day for each cow. So basically it's telling you which cows are your most profitable and which cows are your least profitable. So this report takes into account the cow's production, but it also takes into account her cost of production. So each herd is put into a cost of production group, and this group is based on the previous year's milk supply. The calving date for the cow is also taken into account. So February calving cows have the lowest cost of production, and August calving cows have the highest cost of production. And dry days are also taken into account when calculating the cost of production. So I suppose the whole point of this report is that you might have a cow with, an average to good milk production, but she goes in calf first go every year. And then you might be comparing her to a cow with a much higher production, but she might be slower to go back in calf. Her calving date may have creeped out over the years. She may be calving late. And you might think that the second cow is a brilliant cow because she's producing so much milk, but actually the other cow might actually be more profitable. So that's the beauty of this report. So then the churns, and I think these do confuse people. So this basically, it's important to mention that this is just a within herd comparison. So you're just comparing your cows to each other. This has nothing to do with anybody else's herd. So the green churn is the top 20% of your animals. And this churn is full for everyone, and there's a margin per day underneath that. So that churn is always full. The grey churn then is the middle 60% of your herd, and that the fill of that churn is related to what your average 60% are producing in relation to your top 20%. So the fuller that jar is, the closer your average 60% are to your top 20%. Again, your bottom 20%, the fill of that jar is in relation to your top 20%. So the fuller that jar is, the closer your bottom 20% are in their margin per day to your top 20%. And I suppose if those two jars, your average 60% and your bottom 20%, the fuller they are, the more uniform your herd is. And then you just have some an overview of your somatic cell count for the herd. So then the next few pages of the report, the animals are grouped together. So the third plus lactation animals are grouped together, the second lactation animals are grouped together, and the first lactation animals are grouped together. So then there's a lot of information on this report. So on the left-hand side, you have all the cow details. You have the jumbo number, you have the name, you have the sire, you have the calving date, which is important, you have the lactation number, you have the days in milk. Then you have the production subindex, which is the genetics for milk production, and you have the fertility subindex, which is the fertility, the genetics for fertility. The next section of the report is what each cow did for that particular test day. So your kgs of milk, your fat, your protein, your lactose, and your cell count. So then the next column there with all the colours in it, that's the somatic cell count status for the lactation for each animal. So the oranges are recently infected. So their most recent test was high, but their test before that was low. The reds are chronically infected. They've had 2 high tests. The blue animals are recently cured. So their most recent milk recording was under 200,000 cells per mil, but they had a previous high recording in this lactation. And the green animals are healthy animals. Their cell count has been under 200,000 cells per mil for each test of the year. So then the next section of the report is the current lactation to date. So this is what each animal has done for the current lactation up to now. So it has your milk in kgs, so what they've produced so far in the current lactation. It has your fat and protein kgs, so the fat and protein that they have produced so far in this lactation. And a margin per day for the current lactation is calculated for each cow. And the reds there in that current lactation to date margin per day, they're the bottom 20% of performers in the current lactation. So the next section of the report then is the milk recorded lifetime. So this is what each cow has done over their lifetime. So you've the lifetime fat and protein kgs, you've the average dry days per lactation, because as I've mentioned already, the average dry days per lactation comes into the cost of production for each cow. You've the lifetime total days, and then there's a margin per day over their lifetime calculated for each cow. The greens here on this margin per day, they're your top 20% of performers, and the reds are your bottom 20% over their lifetime. And then you have the group ranking for each animal. So I suppose when we're looking at these reports and you're looking at cows maybe to cull for production, which anybody that gets to cull a cow for production is doing well. Obviously, you're going to be removing your chronically infected cell count cows first. You'll have your cows that are empty, they'll have to go, lame cows, whatever else. But if you've all of those taken care of, and you say, right, I want to look at my poor performers and maybe remove some of those from the herd. What we normally say is you would look at those cows that are red, both in their current lactation to date margin per day and also over their lifetime. So we call those double reds. So as you can see, the 2 cows highlighted now, they're red for the current lactation. So they're not performing very well in this current lactation. And they're also red for their lifetime. So they haven't performed over their lifetime either. And then if you look over there at their production subindex, which is also highlighted in yellow, both of those cows have a very low production subindex. So they have very low genetics for milk production compared to the other cows around them. So that's your poorest performing cows. So then if you want to take two similar cows and compare them, so there's a good example here. So we've two cows here. One is in the top 20% of performers. She's ranked number 2 in this group of animals. And the other animal that's highlighted is in the bottom 20%. She's ranked number 59 out of 69 in the group. So both of these animals have very similar total days. So the animal on top has 2,124 lifetime days, whereas the one underneath has 2,122, so just a difference of 2 days. The average dry days per lactation is also very similar for both animals. The animal in the top 20% has an average dry days per lactation of 73, whereas the other animal, it's 75. So again, just a difference of 2 days. But your fat and protein kgs over the lifetime is where it gets really interesting. So the animal that's in the top 20% over her lifetime has produced 3,708 kgs of fat and protein, whereas the other cow, who is has a very similar amount of days, just 2 days in the difference, has only produced 2,903 kgs of fat and protein for her lifetime. And over here on the left-hand side, you can see there the difference between their production subindex, so their genetics for milk. The animal that's in the top 20% is at 93, whereas the animal that's in the bottom 20% is at 6. So look, those animals with that low production subindex, they're just genetically not capable of producing what some of the other cows are producing. So I suppose, Rosarii, you had a large part to play in the development of the lifetime report. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, just to say that every single column in that report was debated and talked about and twisted and turned, because the previous reports, there was 3 lines per cow. So we were trying to get as much information into one line as we possibly could. And we were adding the lifetime information. And I think the lifetime and it's rewards milk recording. That's what I love about it. So people that have a lot of milk recording behind them, that lifetime figure is very accurate. And what it does is it allows you to compare cows across lactations. And it takes the dry period into account. The first time ever that the dry period was taken into account. So before that, we were only looking at cows in their current lactation, whereas now we're looking at the whole lifetime. It does so much calculations for you. And what I have no farmer has ever argued with me about the cows in the bottom 20%. They might be surprised at the cows that come into the top 20%, but they all know the cows in the bottom 20%. But I can tell them they're in the bottom 20%, but they can tell me why. So it really has revolutionized how we've presented milk recording, and it's a very and it's very accurate. It really is very accurate, but it's a within herd rank. That's the thing to remember. It's not like the EBI. It's not, you can't compare your figures across herds. It's a within herd rank, but it's a very accurate within herd rank.
Yeah, and as you said, any cow can have a bad lactation. She might be lame, she might be whatever else. And that's where the double reds come into it.
Exactly.
So performing in the current and not
Exactly.
performing over her lifetime.
Precisely.
So then the next report, so this is a new report. It's called the Coloured SCC report. You'll find it in ICBF. And this was developed by us here in Munster Bovine. And when I say us, I mean Rosarii, in collaboration with ICBF. So look, it's a very simple report. Basically what it's doing, it's taking the 6 most recent tests for each cow and putting them side by side. And they're color coded so that any test that's over 200,000 cells per mil is colored in red. So it's very easy to look at the trends over time that I was talking about before. And the cows are in order of the most recent test. The cow with the highest percentage contribution to cell count is at the top of the list, and it goes in descending order then. So again, just a nice one just to look at the trends over time with cell count. So then look, we'll just move on to FarmOps, because as I've said already, there's a really nice milk recording section in FarmOps. So FarmOps is Munster Bovine's farm management app. This is what you see when you open up the app. So when you go into your milk recording production and somatic cell count, you will get So it'll bring you in here and you can look at your test date, you can look at your year to date, you can look at your 305 day, you can look at the lifetime just for the first lactation animals, you can look at the lifetime for the second lactation animals. So that's on the left-hand side there. And then you can click into whichever one of those you want and it'll bring you over to what you see on the right-hand side. And then you can filter the cows for whatever trait you want. Is it lactation number? Is it herd rank? Is it margin per day? Maybe you're looking at higher yielders. Maybe you're looking at cows that are high in fat and protein. So you can filter it whatever way you want then when you go into the app. So then there's also a margin analyzer. So again, look, when we're talking about the top 20% and the bottom 20% of cows, so it picks out those top 20% and those bottom 20% of cows for you. It tells you the difference between those animals in the top 20% versus those animals in the bottom 20%. So it'll give you your margin per day on average for both groups. It gives you the lifetime milk recording margin for both groups, the lifetime fat and protein for both groups, and all the other information. And you can actually go up here where it's highlighted in red if you want to actually just look at the list of your top 20% of performers or the list of your bottom 20% of performers. Again, look for that bottom 20%, even just to pick those out and breed them to beef, you'll be doing a good job. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll see the genetics is also included here. The EBI for milk for the top 20% of animals is on average €56, whereas for the bottom 20%, it's only €16. So again, look, the difference in genetics between the two groups is interesting. So then there's another really nice section for somatic cell count management. So you can go in here and you can look at, what cows are healthy, have you cows that were recently cured, and then your cows with your high SCC. And then for that high SCC group, underneath that then, it'll tell you whether those cows might be worth treating or whether there are cows in that group that have a very poor chance of cure and look really should probably be culled or have their quarter dried off. So then you can go into that high SCC churn and you can view all the cows that are inside in it. They are on the right hand side. Now this is actually a different herd, but you can go in and you can look at each cow that's high in the SCC. You can see whether they're persistently infected. You can look at each of their tests, whether they're just recently infected. So all the information is there for you. Equally, you can go in and you can look at those cows that have a poor chance of cure. So you can open it up. It'll tell you the cow numbers. It'll give you their current SCC, that they're persistently infected, and it'll give you the previous tests for those animals as well. And it will tell you that those cows have a poor chance of cure. And they're really the cows that are, chronically infected and they're spreading infection in the herd. So really, look, there's no point treating them. And you really have to manage them accordingly. So again, look, either culling them or drying a quarter. And then look, any animal that you want to look at, you can put in her number and all of her information will come up. So all her production history will come up, all the test days, all her previous milk recordings will be there. There's also mastitis and somatic cell count history. So you get the average somatic cell count for the current lactation, you'll get the average cell count for the previous lactation. You'll get the number of recordings that are over 200 in both lactations. So for this cow here, in the most recent lactation, she's had one test. That one test has been high. She had 5 tests in the previous lactation, and all 5 of those tests were over 200,000 cells per mil. And then also if you record your cases of mastitis and which quarter was affected, it will show you here as well. So this cow, for instance, she had a case of mastitis in the right front quarter in this lactation, and she had 2 cases of mastitis in this quarter in the previous lactation. So all the information is there. And I suppose, look, that's bringing us to the end of our presentation. And I suppose just to summarise, so we've gone through the milk recording benefits, which are numerous, but as Rosarii has pointed out, it really depends on the quality of the data. And the really important thing to emphasise is that we do not have access to your creamery results. So if your milk recording results, if you're not happy with those or you think they're not, representative of what your cows are doing, We have no knowledge of that. So if you do have any issues, contact us. And look, we are there to help. We're happy to help. And we are putting resources into milk quality. So if you do have any issues, please do call us. The number is there on the screen. And look, finally, the last thing I'll say, I've mentioned the herd health program, and I suppose, look, the cut-off point for signing up for the herd health program is approaching. So if you want to be included in the 4 bulk tank tests for the year, you must have signed up before the 24th of March to get all 4 tests done. And all the prices are there on the screen. So that's it. I think we have some questions. Just go to the chat box. So Rosarii, the first one, milk kept from the cow for 12 weeks to rear a calf does not reflect on the cow's kgs of milk. Why is there not a provision for this?
Well, providing the cow is milk recorded, we don't know whether the milk is kept for calves or not. So the milk will be attributed to the cow, providing, that the cow is milk recorded. So what you do with the milk afterwards, we have no knowledge. So we will attribute that milk to that cow, providing it's milk recorded. Now, if it's a cow that's sucking, I don't know, but if the cow is milked, the cow will be credited with the milk.
Yeah. So then the next question, and a good question, really, a very practical one. Where do you get your meters serviced?
So the manual milk meters, we have an AI technician in Castleisland that services meters. So he manual milk meters now. So we only service manual milk meters. Electronic milk meters have to be serviced by the milking machine company. The thing about him now is that obviously during the AI season is not a good time to send in meters because you will be waiting for them. But if you get your milk meters to Mallow, they will come to Castleisland and they will be serviced in Castleisland, and then we'll send them back to Mallow. The important thing is, if you're sending in milk meters, make sure that they are labelled with your herd number, and put them into a good strong bag and or a crate or something like that, and make sure that they're labelled, because I have great crack trying to find meters, and so make sure that they're labelled, make sure you put your herd number on them, and he is an AI technician, so don't send them in during the peak AI season.
This is another question for you, Rosarii. You're mentioned by name. So your fat percentage is different in the morning from the evening. What calculation is used to get the right figure? Also, is SCC lower in the morning with higher volume?
Well, I'll talk about the fat and Elaine can talk about the cell count, but she's the best. So there is a significant difference between the fat in the morning and the evening. And so what we do is we take the yield and the interval into account. So we know that the fat is lower in the morning, and we have the interval. So whether you're doing manual or whether you're doing DIY, in the DIY, the meter records the time, and in the manual, the handheld records the time. So we have the time of milking in both types of recording. So we use the time and we use the interval. That creates the interval, and we use the yield. So we do a calculation then. So what we do is we take the morning fat and we calculate what the evening fat would have been. And then we get a weighted average. So we get the kgs of fat in the morning, the kgs of fat in the evening, and we get a weighted average of the two by dividing by the yield. So that's how we calculate the 24-hour fat.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, the SCC, so I suppose the higher the volume of milk, the SCC will be lower in the morning. But I suppose the important thing to remember is that a high cow will still be high. So, it won't be the difference as to whether, she has a high cell count or a low cell count. There will be a difference, but it shouldn't take, a cow that doesn't have an infection into a high SCC, basically. So it's more about, the actual figure for cell count isn't as important as to is she under 200 or is she over 200? It's more what category they fit into. Are they high or are they low? And like I say, look, it's not going to be such a significant difference that it's going to affect whether she's a high or a low cow. So the next question then, Rosarii, will milk recording ever be able to be estimated by just doing the recording, either in the AM or PM milking, as in once in the day, 4 times in the year? I think maybe, do they mean yield?
Well, I presume not doing the second milking. So just
Yeah.
doing a sampling and one yield. But as I explained earlier, we need the second yield. Well, we need the second yield for two things. We're trying to calculate a 24-hour yield, and that 24-hour yield is used to calculate the lactation yield. So we actually need what the cow produces in the 24 hours. But we also need the yield for the calculation of fat, particularly of fat. So we wouldn't be able to do the calculation, give you a 24-hour fat without the yield, because we use the yield and we use the interval to calculate the fat. We have looked at it. We're not getting good correlations. We have looked at, we'll say every second month, or you'd have to record more often. So we'll say, we've looked at it, we're not getting good correlations, and we certainly wouldn't be able to predict the fat with any degree of accuracy if we had that system.
Okay. So this is one about herd health, so I'll take that one, Rosarii. So how do the milk samples get collected for the herd health program? So the bulk tank, the truck driver basically collects the samples for the herd health program from your bulk tank. You don't have to do anything. The co-ops tell them when to collect them. They collect them. Literally, you have to do no more. So it's really, really simple. You don't even have to think about it. You just sign up, and that's what happens. The next question then, I'm thinking about doing a GeneCells test. When is the best time to do this? And how much will it cost if I've 200 cows? So the GeneCells is the single bulk tank sample for genotyped herds, where you can get the cell count for the individual cows from that bulk tank sample. So the best time to do this, so you have to have a milk recording done before you can do a GeneCells test. And then look, once you have your first milk recording done, you can do a GeneCells test whenever you like. You know, if you want to space it out and do it in between two milk recordings, or if you want to use it when there's a spike in your cell count instead of doing a milk recording. So basically, once you have your first milk recording done, you can do a GeneCells test whenever you want. How much will it cost? So there's been a change in the pricing for GeneCells. So last year it was a price per cow, so however many cows you had in the tank. But this year it's going to be a single price for one price for a single sample. So 180 euros for a bulk tank sample, regardless of the amount of cows in that sample. So that's the GeneCells. So then the next question, Rosarii, this is probably one for you. What happens if you don't get enough agitation in the sample?
So if you don't get enough agitation in the sample, basically, as I said earlier, the fat rises to the top and the sample comes out the bottom. So, and the milk at the start of milking is lower in fat, and the milk at the end of milking is higher in fat. So what's going to happen is you're going to get low fat. Your fat is going to be lower. You're going to get low fat. And really, if somebody has an issue with fat, and a lot of the queries we deal with are fat related. Very small minority of them are protein related. A lot of them are fat related. And agitation is absolutely critical. So if you don't get sufficient agitation, you'll get low fat.
So then, just the last comment from the person that asked about the cows that were taking the milk for the calves. So for the lifetime report that comes from ICBF, which takes from litres delivered to dairy gold, so the milk held back for the calf to beef is not a correct reflection on the cow's kgs. So I think he means his creamery report.
That's in the creamery report, but in the milk recording, any cow that's milk recorded, we use the lactation curves and we calculate back to her date of calving. So all milk is taken into account for milk recording. It may not be taken into account in the creamery, but it is taken into account in milk recording.
And just one final one, for double sampling, is the fat calculated the same as the single sampling?
So for double sampling, what we do is we take a weighted average of the two. So we multiply the yield by the percentage for the AM, multiply the yield by the percentage for the PM. That gives you the kgs of fat for AM and PM, and we divide by the total yield. So what you're getting is a weighted average of the two, and that is very important because it's weighted. So if you have and this is where interval comes into it. So if you have a higher yield and a lower percentage, that will be taken into account. So it's a weighted average. So it's the yield multiplied by the percentage for the AM, yield multiplied by the percentage for the PM, divided by the total yield.
Perfect. Look, I think we leave it at that, Rosarii. So look, I suppose if you do have any further questions, or if you do want to sign up for the Herd Health Programme, or you have any issues with your milk recording, please do ring the office. Thank you to Rosarii for joining me tonight. Thank you to Maeve in the background, and thank you all for watching.
Excellent.
Thanks.